Hopefully the bad boy's in tune. It might not be. Let's tune it. Y'all are getting some behind the scenes footage right now. Usually I do this before we start. There we go. Now we in tune. Hello, everyone. One sec. How's life? Hello, comrade and fellow musician Eddie. Hello, Jacob. I don't know if you could call me a musician, but I appreciate it. I guess I play an instrument, but I feel like you have to be pretty good to be called a musician. I haven't warmed up at all. Oh, yeah. Boom. Call me Justin Bieber. That was fun. Oh, yeah, comrade. Let's go. Thank you, DJ Bass. You're good enough. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate you. Yo, Eddie, what up? Hey. Edification. It's like Californication, but way worse. How's everybody doing? Good to be back on the Wednesday stream. Another Wednesday stream. I do enjoy these days. I do enjoy streaming. This week, I feel like I have a million bajillion things going on. But it's probably also just in my own head with finals coming up. But got a good stream prepared today. I've been excited for this stream all week. A lot of stuff has gone down recently in the news. I'll show y'all my stream plan here, how I kind of have it broken down. Just got an intro, and then biggest news this week in America. So America from a Marxist perspective, then the globe, the world from a Marxist perspective, all the major news, and then Venezuela specifically. And then I got some other videos to react to. So should be fun. Should be really fun. Hey, Eddie, I found this Instagram post. Funny as hell. Well, let's check it out then, huh? Let's check it out. Let me just open my Twitch here in my browser. Oh, it's from Alan McLeod, huh? I love Alan McLeod. Alan McLeod is a journalist from Mint Press News who's had his PayPal banned at one point for telling the truth. Happy birthday to this all-time prediction from the New York Times. Opinion: an Iraq war won't destabilize the Middle East. Yeah, there were a lot of reports like this out of the New York Times and other mainstream outlets in the lead up to the Iraq War. Well, really in the lead up to the Iraq War, because after the war started, obviously nobody could even argue this. But in the lead up to the Iraq War, there were tons of reports saying this is going to be a quick war. This isn't going to last long. It'll be over before you know it. This isn't going to be a very deadly or violent war. It's not going to destabilize Iraq or the rest of the Middle East. You know, it's not like the other wars. We're just going to get in, get Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, and then get out. Obviously, that's not what happened at all. And a lot of these mainstream outlets and their reports on this were based on lies. We're based on this idea that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, this idea that Colin Powell put in people's heads by lying before Congress, claiming that we had evidence Saddam had WMDs, which of course there was never any evidence for. U.S. went in, destabilized the crap out of Iraq and the Middle East, turned it into a disaster where extremist groups were fighting in the power vacuum that was left behind after Saddam was taken out. So yeah, there were all sorts of reports like this. And then most famously, Judith Miller on the front page of the New York Times published a report arguing in favor of war and claiming that we needed to go to war because Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And that's something that to this day, Judith Miller claims that the leftists are just lying. They're lying about her. And actually her reporting was pretty good, which is hilarious because she got that report directly from U.S. intelligence agencies. So like the CIA and the FBI, who we later found were torturing people. They were basically torturing people in Abu Ghraib prison and elsewhere and saying, tell us that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Tell us that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, and then waterboard them, and then kept asking the same question. Basically saying, we'll stop torturing you if you tell us what we want to hear. If you tell us that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. Because, of course, that's not why the U.S. actually wanted to invade. They wanted to invade for oil and other resources. But the weapons of mass destruction was a lie that they used to perpetrate it. So they purposefully, tortured people and asked them to say that specifically. As I said, we'll stop torturing you if you tell us that they have WMDs, which John McCain, who was tortured in the Vietnam War or something, he experienced being a prisoner of war. So he was actually against the use of torture when he was alive, and he spoke out against it. And he also said, not only is this inhumane to torture people, but it doesn't work. Torture doesn't work. You don't actually get the truth by torturing people usually because of what I just said. The U.S. knows what they want to hear. They want to hear Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. You can just torture people till they tell you what you want, even if it's not true. So the New York Times was complicit in all this, took that evidence handed to them by the intelligence agencies and State Department gained through torture, and just published it on the front page nonstop. And talked about how the war was going to be easy and good and how we needed to do it. That'll probably make a good YouTube clip there. So thank you for sending that, Jacob. Appreciate it. I was afraid I'd be late. No worries if you're late, Ware Pilgrim. We appreciate you. Everyone's favorite moderator. Cobra Commander, everyone else's favorite moderator. Over 5,000 sanctions on Venezuela. Shit is ridiculous, yet Venezuela is rising above it. True. We're going to talk about that today. Their currency is still being devalued. Not devaluated. I don't think devaluated is a word. I think it's just devalued. Their currency is still becoming devalued despite some intervention attempts by the Venezuelan central bank, which is funny and ironic because the U.S. has alleviated some sanctions on Venezuela, and Chevron has signed a deal with Maduro and with the PDVSA, the Venezuelan oil company, to extract some oil in a way that's also beneficial to the Venezuelan people. But the U.S. is only doing that, only alleviating some sanctions because uh, of the sanctions on Russia, which are causing their European allies in the U.S. to be short on energy now. So they're looking for a new place to get energy and oil. So they're turning to Venezuela, who they've been sanctioning and who they're still sanctioning, to the point where Venezuela's currency is literally being devalued as they go to Venezuela and say, hey, guys, can we have some oil, please? Can you send us some of that oil? We don't have any. We're getting it from Russia, but now we have to destroy them. So can we have a little bit from you? We're not taking the sanctions off, right? We're not going to allow you to have your own currency or anything. We're not crazy. We're still evil imperialists, but just give us some of your oil. We'll let you make a little bit of money off it. Hey, Eddie, do you think you can squeeze a question I have for you regarding Marx's readings into your schedule today? Yes, I would love to. Like, I have the schedule to keep me on track, but I don't care at all if we go off the schedule. Like, Jacob sent me that Instagram thing. That was just a good thing to react to. So if people send like really good videos that I find interesting or short videos that don't take that long, I'll always do those. And if you have questions about Marxist theory, I'll always do those too. If I'm in the middle of something, if I'm in the middle of a different segment, you might want to ask the question later. Or send me a super chat if you want me to answer it immediately. But I am totally down to go off schedule to answer questions about Marxist theory or to look at videos or, answer questions that I might be able to answer that people have. So yeah, don't think the schedule is like a hard and fast schedule. Go ahead and hit me with any questions you have. And as I said earlier, I'll still answer questions even if you don't send me money. But if you send a super chat, I generally stop whatever I'm doing as soon as I possibly can and answer that super chat question. Did you hear about Jiang Zemin passing? Been learning about how impactful he's been on getting China open and more modernized. I did not hear about that. I am not super familiar with him. I was actually looking him up though the other day because I was looking into who some of the leadership was in between Xi Jinping and Deng Xiaoping. Obviously, he was one of them. So yeah, it's not an era I'm super well versed on with China because honestly, that was like their least. It's hard to say this, but it was almost like their least socialistic era. Like they allowed those markets in, and in a lot of ways, the markets kind of ran wild for a while. Like China's healthcare system, it got a lot more modernized when they opened up to markets and profit motivation. But there was also an increase in inequality, right, and a decrease in the equality of healthcare compared to the government-owned healthcare that was distributed equally. So that's just an example of all the different industries or aspects of Chinese society that were affected by the markets the way that you would expect markets to affect a society. But obviously it's not like private capital, conquered everything. We know that the proletariat's still in power in China. So it's interesting to read about all the Communist Party leadership during that time when everybody, including Michael Parenti, who we love, thought that China was moving towards neoliberalism, when in fact they weren't. Just like the U.S. has said about every previous war, this won't take long. Yeah, and the only one where it was true, well, that's not true. There were others where it was actually a short war, like Panama. They just went into Panama, took it over real quick, and left in the late 80s or early 90s. I can't remember exactly when, but Libya. They went into Libya. I mean, it wasn't quick because it took years of the U.S. backing and arming their preferred groups on the ground and creating this coalition of pro-U.S. extremists. But they had no exit strategy. That, like the other countries, the U.S. ended up occupying Iraq and Afghanistan, right? They said it was going to be a short, quick intervention. It wasn't. The U.S. ended up having to stay there to prevent the country from devolving into a total disaster and having no central government to speak of. Um, and in Libya, they just left. In Libya, they just left. There was never an exit strategy. We know this now. They just wanted to take out Gaddafi and leave. And they're still fighting. There's still, basically no central government in Libya. You just have like these warlords and extremist groups fighting in the power vacuum. And we're talking about a country. Think what you want of Gaddafi. They were one of the most prosperous countries in Africa before that happened. And now the U.S. didn't even occupy them and make themselves like the colonial government. They just left it. No question, just solidarity. Wow, thank you, Ross. You are one of our most consistent supporters. Really appreciate that. Solidarity with you as well. I always say this, but it's an honor that people are willing to donate their money, their own money that they got through their blood, sweat, and tears, their hard labor. They're willing to take a piece of that money and give it to our project. I appreciate it. And as always, we promise to use your money in a way that advances the class struggle. I see somewhat like Cuba's special period. Yeah, that is a good comparison. And Cuba has done a lot of the things that China has done in terms of allowing special economic zones of foreign investment and foreign private capital, still controlled by the government. I mean, yeah, the government and the dictatorship of the proletariat, but it is a similar thing, but also different because Cuba is just this small island country right under the nose of the U.S. empire, right? Literally, I don't know how many miles away from Florida, but it's like 100 miles or less than 100 miles off the coast of Florida. So they're this socialist communist country, this dictatorship of the proletariat, right under the nose of the empire. And the only reason they were able to survive, I mean, this is just a fact. This isn't to throw shade at the Cuban Revolution. This is something that Fidel and Che just said was true. Without the Soviet Union buying Cuba's sugar, they wouldn't have made it, right? They wouldn't have been able to build socialism and develop themselves economically. So by the 90s, they had developed and diversified their economy a little bit by selling sugar, exporting sugar to the Soviet Union, and using the surplus to invest in the people. And the Soviet Union knew that they weren't really benefiting from buying insane amounts of sugar from Cuba, right? They were doing it out of international proletarian solidarity because they knew the U.S. was enforcing an embargo, and they knew that Cuba's soil had become monocropic, or was only able to grow a few crops, tobacco and sugar, because of the Western colonialists and how they had exploited Cuba for years. The soil became adapted just to growing those few crops. So now they've come up with all these innovative agricultural techniques to diversify their agricultural base and what they can actually grow. But the soil has still suffered from that. And then when the Soviet Union fell in the 90s, they didn't have anyone to buy that sugar anymore. They lost their main source of wealth, and their main source of income and surplus. So that's when, that's what they call the special period, where Cubans basically had to ration goods for a while in order to survive. And a lot of people left at that time. Carlos has relatives who left at that time. A lot of people left who like still support socialism and the revolution, right? They just understood, with these horrific US sanctions, with this embargo, I can get a better life for my kids elsewhere. But Cuba's really recovered pretty well since that time, despite the crippling effects of the embargo that persist. All right, I really, really got to pee, and then I'll answer this question. Happy 65. So be right back, folks. Don't leave, please. I'm back already. Who left? 4 people left. What the heck, you guys? Why didn't you listen to me? I told you to stay here. Just kidding. Thanks to everyone who stayed. Thank you. My question is, again, like last time, from Marx's Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. How does Marx connect the fate of feudalism with the fate of landed property? Marx connect the fate of feudalism and the fate of landed property. I mean, in a general sense, because every Marxist should study the French Revolution and the revolutions that brought an end to feudalism and the reign of the Catholic Church and that aristocracy in Europe. Because basically you had first the production of commodities and the circulation of commodities had evolved to a really high level because of the advance of technology. So the advance of technology was starting to bring about the Industrial Revolution, which allowed for, more powerful ships and methods of transportation to bring commodities around, to circulate commodities faster, as well as an increase in machines and machine production and how efficient machine production actually was. So with that, there's a great increase in commodities, and you start to see the formation of these manufacturing factories, and workers paid wages in those factories. And it evolves from basically these guilds, where you had like journeymen who would train under a master in whatever craft, and they would produce commodities locally. But as this evolves, as they produce more and more, and as the methods of transportation evolve more and more, the production is expanded, and it starts to look more and more like capitalist factory production that we see today, like the assembly line. So as this happens, the factory owners, the former guild masters, or just the people who own that facility and own the machines that are producing all these things, start to become the most powerful economic class in society. They start to become more powerful than the lords who own these giant swaths of land and have peasants farming under them, as well as the merchants, the people involved in the transportation of these commodities. Also start to become one of the most powerful economic classes in society, because they're also making money off the sale and transport of commodities that other people create with their labor. So as this bourgeois class, and that's what we call them, the bourgeoisie, they started as merchants and guild owners or factory owners. They start to organize themselves. You also have the Enlightenment, where this philosophy of reason comes about, and we can decide what our society is like and what our government is like based on reason, and using logic, rather than previously under feudalism. The church said that these kings, these lords, these landowners are ordained by God, and if you're a peasant, you just have to work under them really hard because that's what God wants. So that goes away largely with the Enlightenment, and you have these revolutions like the French Revolution, which are the peasants fighting against the landowners, the lords, yes, but it's also the bourgeoisie. It's the capitalists leading these revolutions and fighting alongside the peasants, or leading the peasants in this class struggle against the feudal aristocracy, the church and the landlords. So that leads to a change in property, right? The land that's owned by the feudal lords is transferred to the bourgeoisie, and you see more and more industrialization, and more peasants are forced off of their land and into the towns to work in manufacturing jobs rather than agricultural jobs, or rather than working under the lord who's no longer in power. And it's a transfer of property. So class struggle and ideological struggle with the Enlightenment leads to a transfer of property, a change in property ownership, a change in who owns the means of production and the land, from the aristocracy, the feudal aristocracy, to the bourgeoisie. So that creates capitalism, though. That creates a system of wage labor where everybody works under this bourgeois class. So the class struggle then under capitalism becomes the proletarians, the working people, versus the capitalists who now own the land rather than the aristocracy. So the struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie comes to an end or is final or leads to the transfer of property, the transfer of the means of production and the land from the hands of the bourgeoisie into the hands of the workers. So yeah, that's the best answer I can give you. Hopefully that answered your question, but hit me with any follow-ups. Coup in Peru, Eddie. Was there a coup? I know that Castillo has not been popular. Pedro Castillo has not been popular, nor anti-imperialist, nor socialistic. Fact, the merchant class on steroids. Basically, and Marx makes this prediction in the manifesto where he says that capitalism for the first time divides society into two great classes, right? So under feudalism, you had a handful of classes, but under capitalism, there's two great ones. There's the capitalists and the workers, which, capitalism has other classes besides the workers and the owners. Like, that was probably Marx just simplifying things in the manifesto, because he goes on to talk about like productive versus unproductive labor and the transport industry and the differences between these different classes within capitalism. Still, ultimately, you have the wage laborers, the people who sell their labor for a wage, and then you have the owners. But there's like small business owners, right? There's the petty bourgeoisie. There's the lumpen proletariat, which Marx says are people who don't actually sell their labor. They make money through crime and other methods like that. There's Marx never saw this come about really, but the professional managerial class, a class of people who are basically the managers and the professionals that have come about with capitalist development. So it's a question of who are the allies of the proletariat. There's a really good piece, or there's a really good part of CPUSA's manual of 1935 that talks about who the allies of the proletariat are, and they talk about the petty bourgeoisie, the lumpen elements, things like this. So yeah, that's a bit of a tangent, but hopefully that answers your question basically. Great answer, Eddie. Cleared up some misunderstandings I was having. Great. I'm glad to hear that. This is the last thing I'll say about it before we move on, but one sec. Like, something to understand is, like, when I was first reading Marx, I always wanted them to explain that more in depth. I always wanted them to explain the transition out of feudalism and into capitalism more in depth. And you realize that they do explain it and they do analyze it extremely thoroughly, but they're also like living in this time where capitalism has just come to prominence, right? And they're living in Europe where everybody has just witnessed this, right? Everybody's seen it with their own eyes, the transition into capitalism with the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the bourgeois class. So there's less there's less dumbed down basic explanations that they give, right? They never just say like directly, here's the connection between feudal property and capitalist property, and how it was abolished under feudalism, and here's how property ownership will change under capitalism. Like, they do say that, but they say it slowly and complexly with a lot of detailed analysis of what's going on. And a lot of what's going on, like now, the Industrial Revolution was however many years ago, hundreds of years ago, but in the late 1800s, it had just kind of come to its completion or fruition. So there's things that they don't explain just because I feel like they expect everybody to know it, because of the time that they were writing in, which is impossible to avoid, really, unless you're like so arrogant that you're like, my writings will be read in the future by millions of people and they'll know I was right. Marx was confident in what he wrote, but he was still writing for people in modern day too. In his modern day, sorry. Midwestern Marx, I'm creating an alternative history graphic novel for veteran leftists to enjoy and a new leftist to learn from. Do you have any Marxist concepts that can easily prime potential leftists into Marx? Wow. That sounds like a very cool project. Any concepts? I like the concept of exchange value versus use value. right? Value is just labor time. Value is human labor interacting with tools and the earth to create wealth. And labor is the source of all wealth when combined with nature. So that's value. But use value is the use that a commodity has qualitatively. So you can't put a number on it, you can't measure it. It's just the use that a commodity produced by labor brings to people or brings to someone. And if a commodity doesn't have a use value, nobody will buy it from the market. So even under capitalism, you can't create useless commodities. They have to have some kind of use to people. But that's not what the capitalists are after. The capitalists aren't looking at the market and saying, how do we maximize use values here? How do we bring the use values that people need to people in a way that's rational? They're just trying to produce a use value so that they can make exchange value. So this is one of the major differences that I like to point out, or one of the main concepts I like to point out to people, that difference between exchange value and use value. Exchange value is the value that a commodity has in comparison to all the other commodities in circulation, which is quantitative, which we can put a number on, and we call that number the price. It's expressed in money. So every commodity has a use, and every commodity has a price. The price represents the exchange value. The use is the use value, the qualitative and quantitative aspect of the commodity concealed within the commodity. So that leads to all sorts of negative outcomes. Like I always point to the opioid crisis, where the use value of opioids gets people addicted and kills them. And the capitalists, the pharmaceutical companies knew this, but they still expanded the market anyways. They lied about it to expand the market and start prescribing opioids for pain and anxiety so that they could make more money, so that they could make more exchange value. So the use value is always deprioritized versus the exchange value under capitalism. And I just feel like that's a good way to explain it. Like that's why Marx starts Capital Volume 1, chapters 1 through 3, with this discussion of the different kinds of value and use value and exchange value. And he doesn't really explain what they mean, or he does so, but he does so very slowly and kind of expecting you to go back and read it again or understand Hegel and the dialectic. But there's easier ways to explain the difference between use value and exchange value. And I wish more people would put effort into doing that, because it would help people read Capital Volume 1 if they knew what use, exchange, and the three different kinds of value, use value, exchange value, and value, are going into reading it. So if you're doing an alternative history graphic novel, I think that would be a cool concept. But I don't know. Since it's for veterans, I don't know if you want to focus more on imperialism or what, but I think that's a great idea. How do exchange values become capital? That is discussed in Capital Volume 2. I mean, it's discussed everywhere, but exchange value, to actually get the value of a commodity, the capitalists have to sell it on the market, right? They can't just produce it, otherwise it'll just be a commodity. But once they produce that commodity, so I'll actually restart. The capitalist takes his money, advances it as capital. So when he spends his money to produce more, that money becomes capital. When he spends his money to make more money, that's when it becomes capital. So he advances his money as means of production, buys the tools, buys the raw materials, pays rent on his factories, the means of production, the productive commodities. And under a fully developed system of capitalism, the means of production are also in the form of commodities, and they're sold by a different capitalist. But either way, then he advances the other part of his money, the other part of his capital, as wages. He pays his workers for their labor. You combine the means of production, the raw materials and tools and factories, with the labor, and you get commodities. But as we said earlier, the capitalist cannot make money. He cannot use the money he advanced originally to make more money unless he sells those commodities, unless he brings those commodities to market and finds a buyer for them. Once he finds a buyer for them, somebody comes in and says, I'm going to give you this amount of money for those commodities. For the capitalist, his commodities have now been transformed into money. And if he sells all his commodities, he now has more value, more money than what he started with, than what he advanced as means of production and labor. so he can take the money he's made, continue his operations, continue to pay for the same amount of means of production and labor that he did before, but he also has a surplus. He also has more money than what he started with after his commodities are sold. So he can use those to buy more means of production, more labor, or he can take some as profit and use it for his own consumption. So once exchange values are advanced as capital, advanced as means of production and labor designed to make the capitalist a surplus value, another important kind of value, then it is capital. Thank you. Thank you. What did Jacob say up here? In reference to what Eddie mentioned earlier about U.S. short wars, Operation Just Cause occurred in 1989 to overthrow Noriega. Yes, that's the guy's name. I almost said that, but I didn't want to get it wrong. Who used to be a U.S.-backed dictator of Panama, but was also a drug trafficker who was trained in the infamous School of the Americas that used to be Panama. And he was one of the complicit figures in the CIA-enforced drug trafficking ring to help the Contras in Nicaragua during the Iran-Contra affair. Yes, I knew Noriega was kind of a mixed figure, but thank you for explaining that, Jay. Because nobody ever talks about that. Nobody ever talks about Panama. And that was the time when the Soviet Union was already in the process of collapsing. It was already in the process of breaking down. So they weren't able to provide this umbrella of protection over the global South and Latin and Central America. Because the Soviet Union and China were in the UN Security Council, which gave them veto power. And we've said this stat a million times that's in Vijay Prasad's Washington Bullets. The first 50-some U.S. intervention attempts, or the first 50-some vetoes at the UN after it was founded after World War II, were the Soviet Union vetoing U.S. intervention attempts. So you see when the Soviet Union's in the process of collapsing, the U.S. is able to do this invasion in Panama, which was them kind of testing the waters. You know, how much can we really do here? How much can we get away with now that we don't have to worry about the Soviets? And then after that, you saw the Gulf War, where Iraq's industry was bombed to a pre-industrial state. And then the U.S. Proceeded to put sanctions on them that killed 500,000 children, which Madeleine Albright said was worth it on 60 Minutes, only for the U.S. to then invade like 11 or 12 years later and occupy Iraq with the infamous Iraq War. But none of that would have been possible if the Soviet Union was still in the Security Council. It just is what it is. I know people don't like the Soviet Union after Khrushchev, and Khrushchev sucked. He made a whole bunch of mistakes. He is part of what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is why Stalin was goated. But the Soviet foreign policy was still helpful, right? People talk about how the Soviet Union became social imperialists. Like, I disagree with that. They were providing an umbrella of protection over so many countries, you know, and you can critique their specific interventions, like when they went to Afghanistan, but their purpose was not the same as the U.S. This question is answered by Wage, Labor, and Capital and Marx. Absolutely. One of my favorite books. One of my favorite pamphlets. Marx's theories of alienation and estranged labor is a great opener. Folks don't even need to know a single thing about Marxism to understand alienation. They already are living it every day. I love that, Cobra Commander. I do. When I first started reading Marx and getting into Marxism, the one concept I wasn't sure about was alienation. So I'm like, there are so many things that cause alienation in society, like, you know, so many ways that you can feel alienated. For one, I doubted that capitalism is, you know, the only thing producing alienation. And then two, I just didn't understand how you could have a scientific analysis of alienation. But now it's like one of my favorite Marxist concepts, because like you said, everybody feels it. Everybody feels alienation. Everybody feels alienation at their job, right, while they're producing for a capitalist. So people can identify with that concept very quickly. And it's also sort of like a psychological concept, which Marx doesn't go into human psychology too much. He just says everybody ultimately acts in their own material interest. But it's one place where he's talking about the sort of psychology of capitalism and how it causes us to be alienated from each other. And if you see like all the there were 600 mass shootings in the U.S. this year, and all people talk about is gun control and taking the guns, but like that is a product of an incredibly alienated and isolated society where people are alienated from one another. But anyway, Marx's concept of alienation is also very material, right? It's not just him saying everybody's alienated because capitalism bad, right? Or it's not him saying what I just said. There are all these mass shootings because people are alienated and capitalism bad. That's true, but Marx goes into the specific, concrete, material forms of alienation, the specific ways people become alienated. So people become alienated from different things. People become alienated from the government that serves as a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. People become alienated and isolated from each other. And what Marx focuses the most on is people are alienated from the product of their labor, right? When you produce a commodity at work, the commodity goes to the capitalist, and not only do you not get the money that you made or the value that you put into that commodity, because the capitalist exploits you and gives you less value than what you create via wages, but you also have no control over production, right? Most of us spend 40 hours a week plus at work, and it's run like a total authoritarian dictatorship. You have absolutely no say. You have to do what your boss or the managerial staff says all day, and they're constantly pushing you to work harder, harder, harder for less and less money so that they can maximize their own profit. And you have no say of what happens with the product, right? The capitalist gets to take the product you created and do whatever he wants with it. So it leads to this alienation that people feel at work, alienation from the product of their labor. The workers know more about their work. They're geniuses when it comes to their workplace. They know everything about the workplace and the structure and the commodities they create, yet they have zero control over it. It's all controlled by a capitalist who doesn't even have to come to work if he doesn't want. He can chill in his vacation home because he doesn't actually produce anything. So this also causes an alienation between, or a division between, mental and physical labor. So you go to work every day and you provide physical labor for your boss, but you're not mentally in it because you're not gaining anything from working harder. All what you're really going to try and do is skimp out and do as little as possible, get exploited as little as possible because you know that you're getting exploited. So under socialism, when people have control over their own workplace and when they have control over the product of their labor, when they're no longer alienated from the labor process and from the product of labor, then it's likely that people will be more inclined to go to work. They'll care more about their workplace. There will not be this alienation between mental and physical labor. Arguably, Marx was the first and true father of psychology, according to Jacques Lacan. That's true. I just don't like a lot of those like psychoanalytical Marxists. I feel like they just a lot of them stem from like the Frankfurt School and stuff like that. But I also haven't read a lot of them, to be fair. The first 5 of 57 vetoes in the Security Council was from the USSR to prevent the US and West from invading a sovereign country for capitalist economic opportunity. Yep. Why did the USSR/goats of Stalin not use their veto in 1950 during the UN-US intervention in the Korean Peninsula? Good question. I know. And also the voting plan that divided Korea in half was created at the UN. Like the UN helped enforce the split of Korea, which is why I include the UN as one of the tools of imperialism in my journal article about the toolbox of capitalist imperialism. But I know I've read before about what the Soviets were doing and saying and thinking, but I can't remember exactly what it was. And when did Goats of Stalin actually? 1953, so he wouldn't see that full conflict or war play out. I mean, he did because he was in pretty good health all the way up till he got sick and died. But yeah, I don't know. Good question. Someone let me know if you know. We can look it up actually. Soviet Union was not officially belligerent during the Korean War. They played a significant covert role in the conflict, providing material and medical services as well as Soviet pilots and aircraft, most notably the IMG-15 fighter jets, to the aid of the North Korean and Chinese forces against the United Nations forces. So the Soviet Union gave material support covertly to the Koreans. I don't know why they didn't protest at the UN. It may have just been one of those things where they're like, we have to pick our battles and there's nothing that we can really do here. I'm not positive, but according to Wikipedia, they did give covert support to Mao and the DPRK, who were led at the time by Kim Jong-un's grandpa, Kim Il-sung. Armchair historian about life in East Germany. Okay. Definitely we'll add that to the list of things to watch eventually, even if we don't get to it today. Got a lot of people tuning in to watch the stream. Welcome to everybody who just joined us. I haven't actually gotten into any of the videos I had scheduled to watch today. I've just been answering questions and interacting with the chat. But as I said earlier, you can send me a super chat if you want me to stop what I'm doing and answer your question pretty immediately. Sorry, I'm finding this video Jacob sent us. So you can send us a super chat. Also, be sure to comment on the stream, like the stream, share the stream. All of this helps boost us in the algorithm, stops the algorithmic suppression that we suffer as revolutionaries, trying to educate people. So yeah, give us a like, comment, share. All of it helps. We have a Patreon if you want to super support us. But yeah. Totally making my shift more bearable. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. I'm here for you. Love your content. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. James Graham says Z. There are people on TikTok, because I'm more careful what I say on TikTok, right? I'm like, listen, I have to say, like, every time I talk about Russia, Ukraine, I don't support war. I don't support war. I don't support conflict. I don't support death. My point is that the U.S. created this conflict. Russia told them, Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. Stop meddling in Ukraine. The U.S. still overthrew Ukraine's government and started training up NATO troops on Russia's border and shelling people in Donbass, literally creating a war in the Donbass. Which was the start of the current war. The current war started in 2014. Russia intervening in 2022 was a huge escalation. It greatly changed the conflict, but people in the Donbass were being attacked and having their homes shelled since the U.S.-backed coup. But anyways, I have to say over and over and over again, like, I'm against this war because I don't like war. War is bad. And they're just like, whatever, you Putin supporter. And then people will take clips from my stream and be like, look at this in the stream. Somebody said Z in the chat, and Eddie smiled and nodded. It's like, we knew he was a Putinist. Like, y'all are just weird. Like, how obsessed with me are you that you're literally watching my streams to try and debunk my TikToks? I got banned from TikTok the day after Russia started their operation. They know now that TikTok purged like thousands of accounts. I see the super chat. Thank you very much. I'll answer that in 1 second after I quick talk about this. It was something. Oh yeah, here it is. It's right on the first paragraph. So this is an article from Alan McLeod, who we talked about earlier, Mint Press News. The NATO to TikTok pipeline. Why is TikTok employing so many national security agents? I won't talk about it in depth because I've covered this article 800 million times because it's so applicable to me and the audience. But it says TikTok itself has taken steps to align itself with U.S. government policy, deleting more than 320,000 Russian accounts and removing at least 41,000 videos peddling misinformation, which, you know, from NATO ops and the national security agents at TikTok, misinformation means the truth. And pro-Russian accounts means anything that calls out NATO and U.S. interventionism. In addition to this, it has placed warning labels marked Russia state-controlled media on 49 accounts linked to the Russian government. It has not done so with Western state-owned outlets like BBC, RTE, or the CBC. So they deleted 320,000 Russian accounts, which, you know, our account got deleted. Does that include us? I'm not Russian. I've never even been to Russia. I feel like deleting all those Russian accounts was just deleting people who criticize NATO. Because also, I probably should have explained this at the beginning. That's right when we got banned, too. It was right when the military operation began. And we started talking about the U.S. coup in Ukraine. And thank you, Just Haw, for the super sticker. No question. Just so you know, if you send a super chat with a question on it, I'll answer the question as soon as I possibly can. We still appreciate the super stickers, of course. I just want you to know, if you want me to talk about something, I will. Thank you so much for the support, though. Much love, much love. I feel like I've had to follow and refollow like 4 of your accounts. I'm sure you have. Right now, I have 2. I only have 2. I have Eddie Liger Smith, or Eddie Liger, and I have MidwesternMarks.com. Surprised Esha is still on TikTok. She is so careful. I will not say that you're trying to get me banned. Yeah, she is, and she's been banned like 4 times. And I basically gave Esha like a crash course. I was like, all right, Esha, here's the shit you have to stop saying on TikTok or you're going to get banned. I'm like, don't say Nazi. Everybody will know what you mean if you say Yahtzee. That's like the TikTok code word. You like can barely talk about fascism or Hitler. You can't like praise openly really Stalin because TikTok basically views him as another Hitler because they're run by NATO ops. And NATO's more close to Hitler than fucking anything Stalin did. But yeah, you gotta be careful on TikTok. Banning people just because they're Russian sounds racist to me. It's weird how freaking like openly racist a lot of people have gotten with the Russia conflict just because of their Russophobia. But I should probably jump into at least one of these things that I had pulled up to read for today and to go over. This right here is one of the funniest things I ever done seen. Black Like Mao, or some of you might know them as Maoist Red Guard, posted this on their Medium about a year ago, a little over a year ago, about Carlos's concept of the purity fetish, a criticism of Carlos's purity fetish concept. And it says, upholding the revolutionary proletarian line is not a purity fetish, a response to Carlos Garrido's why Western Marxism misunderstands the use of markets. Now, when I opened this, I was like, oh, interesting. You know, I can't wait to hear what this Marxist critique of Carlos is and whether I agree with it. But then I realized I knew this person from somewhere, the Black Like Mao account. And so I started reading the article. And I found it to be a bit silly. Rather than a comradely critique, it starts out like this. A terrible article written by a modern revisionist theoretician, Carlos Garrido, appeared in the Hampton Institute's website on November 29th. In this article, which is titled Why Western Marxism Misunderstands China's Markets, Garrido makes not one reference or citation from Mao or any of his Chinese contemporaries. I repeat, this is an article supposedly about Chinese Marxism, which fails to make use of Mao. That sets the tone for his abominable excuse of an article and marks the author as a charlatan from the very beginning. So for a comradely critique of another Marxist, he's going in on Carlos here with the pejoratives, with the ad hominem attacks. And also, this isn't even a critique. He doesn't start it out with a thesis or what's actually wrong with Carlos's paper. He's just mad that Carlos didn't cite Mao. So as I was reading this, I sent it to Carlos and Noah. Noah, of course, is a great Midwestern Marx editor and writer, and I was like, dude, read this hilarious article about Carlos. And Noah reminded me that this guy, Black Like Mao,
My husband
who wrote this article, is the same guy who was on Dr. Phil at one point for trying to blow up his neighbor's swing set. I swear this is a real guy, and that's what I remembered him from. I couldn't think of it at the time when I first started reading the article, but as soon as Noah said that, I remembered who this guy was.
My husband and I were asleep in bed, and we heard a loud explosive.
You can see on the video Maritha's 3 sons come out of the garage, light an explosive, and all 3 of them run back to the house when the explosion goes off.
We cannot believe that 3 children tried to blow my kid's swing set up. What's next? Is she going to try to kill us? Is she going to blow our house up?
Well, Jonna and Alan say their ongoing feud with their new neighbors has extended to Maritha's 21-year-old son, Christopher, who they claim set off explosives in their backyard. She referred to it as a mortar shell or something like that. Even though they claim they captured the explosion on their home surveillance cameras, Christopher denies having any involvement and says Jonna and Alan are lying and just trying to defame his character.
John and Alan believe that I set off an explosive in their yard. She had a grainy video. I couldn't even tell if the...
Sorry, I tried to rewind so I could...
grainy video.
This is the guy. Dang it. That's the guy who wrote the article about Carlos. And he's waging a protracted people's war here on his neighbor's swing set. You know, if this isn't Maoist praxis, I don't know what is.
Grainy video, I couldn't even tell if these were adults or grown men or little kids. They are obviously lying. I go to a very, very good university, and I would not jeopardize my presence at that university. It doesn't shock me that she would make these accusations because that's in her role as the malicious neighborhood gossip. They say that I sit in my kitchen window at all hours of the day and night and record them. I only record them in an effort to protect myself and my family from lies. I believe that John is a racist. She also relies upon negative stereotypes of African-American people as being violent and criminal by nature. My worst fear is that the situation will spiral further out of control, and we will have another replay of the Mike Brown incident or the Trayvon Martin incident where one of my younger brothers, myself or my mother, will end up laying out there in the middle of that cul-de-sac dead.
Now, I'm not denying that, this family was racist towards him, this family that lives in this cul-de-sac or this suburban neighborhood. They probably were. But to blow up their children's swing set, that just seems extreme. Seems like an extreme response to whatever these people did, because they obviously didn't physically harm you. They didn't attack you, unless they were inciting violence against you. Some people say that swing was a dingus, though. Yeah, I mean, maybe that swing supported China's reform and opening up policy. Maybe that swing understands how China uses special economic zones in order to increase their productive forces while still combating poverty and bringing about common prosperity. And therefore, that swing needed to be blown up for revisionism.
Christopher, welcome. We've been looking at some of your tweets. When you're tweeting about we don't need gun control, we need cracker control, are you meaning we need to get the white folks under control in this neighborhood?
I very possibly might have been referring to them as some of our other neighbors that have been harassing and tormenting us since we moved into this neighborhood. I very well might have been. She's scared because my mother is a convicted felon. Martha Stewart is a convicted felon. So if Martha Stewart moved into the neighborhood, would you be afraid of her? Would you be doing all of these things to her? I think not.
And she also called you a pervert.
Yes, she did call me a pervert.
So those probably going to be some next false charges brought on you.
Oh,
You think
because that's what I believe they're trying to do. They're trying to
Do you
keep the-
believe that he was involved in setting off
Yes.
the explosion in your backyard?
Yes.
Were you?
No, I was not.
Do you know who was?
I do not know.
Okay, he's smiling like it definitely was him. He's like, it wasn't me. Like that's not very convincing. I do not like Dr. Phil though. This whole spectacle is just hilarious. Let's watch just a little more.
It was July 5th. It was probably some little neighborhood kids running around playing with fireworks. Again, you have this narrative of black male as being violent, black male as being criminal.
Well, don't tell me I have a narrative. I'm asking questions. A narrative is a declarative statement. I'm asking questions, so
That's
I have no
narrative.
narrative.
They're declaring that we are violent, we are criminals, we are out to hurt them because, I don't know, they're saying that we're upset about them calling animal control on us and we have guns in the house and things like that. There's not even a slingshot in our house. We don't use guns. And we most certainly don't use explosives.
In the pre-interview, Christopher says the explosive happened at midnight and you were in bed,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you told us. Maritha says she never talked to the police about the fireworks and her sons were never questioned about it, right?
All right, Dr. Phil's voice is just boring. But there you go. There's the guy who wrote this article about Carlos upholding the proletarian line. I don't know. I was talking in the last stream about how a lot of Maoists, a lot of Marxist-Leninist Maoists nowadays are just ultras, right? And they'll say things like, we need to have a protracted people's war in the U.S. right now. Like all Marxists need to join together and take up arms against the ruling class. Like, no, that's just going to get people killed and be super destructive. And nobody in the working class actually wants that. But I don't know. Maybe him blowing up the swing set is the way to start the protracted people's war. You know, just start taking explosives and blowing up all the different revisionist swing sets that exist. So, well, Garrido does not make use of Mao in his groundbreaking economic analysis and the lessons of the period of bank. And Carlos has read so much Mao. Carlos has read like almost everything Mao's ever put out. And Mao would not be in favor of a lot of the modern Maoists. Also known as the socialist period of China, he makes good use in true charlatan fashion of a number of Chinese words and references to Hegel. How dare he reference Hegel in an article about Marxism, even though Mao's On Contradiction is like the best summary of Hegel that's ever existed, the best summary of the dialectic used to explain to peasants and workers that's ever been made. Garrido does not make use of Mao in his writings from the socialist period because he knows Maoist economics is directly in opposition to the snake oil that he is peddling. I mean, there were people who wanted to do more reform and opening up under Mao, though. Deng Xiaoping, who did the reform and opening up, was a member of the party and a high-ranking member of the party during the era of Mao. This debate was going on under or during the era of Mao. They just decided to go with a more top-down planned model at the beginning of their revolution, just to get things going. He also fails to make use of Maoist theoreticians and economists because they have this to say. Yeah, we don't have to read this whole article. It's not very good. It's just him whining about Carlos not using Mao and not citing the Maoist economists that he likes that agree with him. So silly article. Hilarious that guy, it's the same guy who blew up his neighbor's swing set. And I'll answer that super chat in a quick sec. But again, blowing up your neighbor's swing set is not a protracted people's war. That's not what Mao meant. We don't need to start doing that. And Mao said 1,000,000 times the number one goal of the party. The number one goal is to consolidate support of the people, which you do by serving the people, meeting their needs, listening to what their interests are, and serving them. Blowing up people's swing sets is not going to consolidate support of the people. So maybe you need to read Mao, sir. And it reminds me of the Baltimore Maoists who were on TikTok a while back. These guys are super based. Check them out.
The way
Fudge.
critique of it, that's what we're Maoists. We make a critique of it in order to improve socialism the next time it comes around and throws people like your ass into a labor camp.
See, we've done a lot to improve the reputation of socialism in this country after years and years of McCarthyism. But this shit does not help. Stop doing this shit. This does not consolidate support of the people like Mao said. This just makes us look really, really, really bad when you blow up people's swing sets and threaten to throw them in a labor camp if they don't listen to you. That's not what Mao would have wanted. Mao would disagree with modern Maoists, part 1000. So Maoist ultras, please stop. Please, please, please stop. The lumped proletariat. I'm not an ultra. I'm one of the good ones. Only met like 3 other folks like me. There are a lot of... I've met people who call themselves Marxist, Leninist, Maoists because they think the works of Mao are, revolutionary and necessary and provide new content that we need to, learn from as Marxists. And that's true. I agree with all of that stuff. But I'd also know a lot of people who stopped calling themselves Maoists because of how so many modern Maoists act. And I love Mao. I've read so much Mao. On Contradiction is something I recommend to everyone. That's in my Eddie Lager's Guide to Understanding Marxism. On Contradiction is one of the first books I recommend. But it's because it explains the dialectic. It explains Hegel in a way that peasants, some of whom were illiterate, could understand. And then you have this article from the Maoist guy criticizing Carlos for quoting Hegel. Like, Mao quoted Hegel a bunch and thought it was super important to read Hegel. Sorry to ignore the super chats for so long. That's on how the gangs took over Haiti's capital. I don't know what you mean that's on, or I don't know what you're referring to when you say that's on. But Haiti for a while. Oh, thoughts on, you mean? You probably mean thoughts on. Yeah, I mean, it's all a product of U.S. interventionism. The U.S. did not one but 2 coups in the 90s and early 2000s to take out Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who had all these plans for economic development in Haiti. And the second time they overthrew him, Vijay Prashad points this out, similar to Libya, which we were talking about earlier. Haiti was left without a central government, really. They basically had no universally or democratically recognized central government that could do things that the central government needs to do in a society or a capitalist society. So Vijay Prashad says Haiti basically became a republic of NGOs. Their central government is essentially US-backed NGOs. And then you have a lot of gangs with a lot of power and a lot of military power who the government can't crack down on and get rid of because there basically is no government. Like I said, the government's a bunch of US NGOs, which is why you had gangs, assassinate the president of Haiti a while back, and people just kind of shrugged their shoulders. I mean, it was big news, but it's like, imagine if the president of the US got assassinated by gangs, because the gangs were just so powerful. And then they kind of got away with it, It's because Haiti doesn't have the power or the government force, the authority to crack down on gang violence, so gangs run wild. And all the U.S. and the U.S. NGOs are worried about is extracting Haiti's resources, which the situation has now become such a disaster that they're floating the idea of intervening, sending the military. Like, shoot, this coup that we did in Haiti really allowed the country to become chaotic. We better send in our troops to take them over and occupy them. And a lot of the people protesting right now are leftists, are socialists, are people who know the history of U.S. and Western interventionism in Haiti. They know the West created this situation, so they're protesting and trying to get the workers in power, trying to kick out these Western NGOs, and so Haiti can develop themselves. Haiti's also been paying reparations to the French for ending slavery in the 1800s for their revolution, which was led by the slaves. To this, till up until like a few years ago, or maybe they're still paying it to this day. I can't remember, but they've also had to make these massive payments to the French, basically colonial taxes. That has not helped their economy at all. It's hurt their economy. So, yeah, that's what's created the situation in Haiti, the uprisings in Haiti. There are gangs, right? There are powerful gangs, but there also are people protesting. There were journalists protesting a while back because a couple Haitian journalists were murdered by forces loyal to the U.S. and U.S. NGOs. So, crazy situation in Haiti right now. Are Pat Socks and Rad Libs two sides of the same coin? No. I disagree. Thank you for the super chat, Lumpen Proletariat. And thank you, RD Doctor. I think the best way I can explain this is to go to Twitter and go to Kayla Pop. Shoot, I have to pee so bad. Sorry, y'all. I'm gonna answer this question after I get back from peeing. Is that okay with y'all? It's gotta be, because I have to go so bad. Don't leave. Ooh. Dang it, we lost people again. I asked you all not to leave, and yet 4 of you did. Pat Socks and Rad Libs, two sides of the same coin. Now, I know Pat Socks means a certain thing in America, or it means something different in America than it does elsewhere, but every worker or every set of workers in the world is going to have some sense of national pride, and they're going to have some sort of patriotism towards their own country. It's just the way that it is. And that is the same of the American working class, right? And what we want to do is not destroy our own country, but turn that country into a worker state, sublate that country, take that country from a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie to a dictatorship of the proletariat. And in order to do that, you have to have, a sense of love for your country. You have to have a desire to make it better, to make it great. Which, obviously workers all over the world have for their own country. That's kind of what that sense of patriotism is. And it's interesting it's a different situation in the US for sure because of ultra patriotism, or super patriotism, as Parenti calls it. This idea that we're just the best country no matter what we do, and therefore all of our foreign policy is correct and right. And we're just acting as the world police. We're acting benevolently in everybody's interest. No matter how much of a disaster the U.S. has created in Iraq or elsewhere, we needed to go there. They were going to come get us. That's this super patriotism idea, which is a distorted form of patriotism, a manipulation tactic of the bourgeoisie preying on the sense of patriotism that all workers feel, the sense of national pride that every worker in the world in any country feels, and turning it into an ideology of violence and imperialism and capital expansion. And what people, so-called Pat Socks, want to do, as far as my understanding, is sublate that patriotism. Say, no, if you love your country, you'll want to make it better. If you love your country, you're against these horrific wars that are paid for with American tax dollars and send American people to fight and die. And I think, any movement, and Stalin lays this out in Marxism and the National Question, like, socialists support first self-determination, right? The right of any people to determine their own government, to have democracy and control of their own state, their own country, their own economy. And then once we have national self-determination, the people can struggle for socialism. So this is why the Soviet Union was against Western colonialism in the Third World. Even if the Third World countries weren't explicitly socialist, we still don't support the U.S. sanctioning them and trying to do regime change, similar to Iran today. Iran's not explicitly socialist, but we still support the self-determination of their people. We support the U.S. leaving their country alone so that the Iranian people can then struggle for socialism and develop the kind of system they want to develop. So national self-determination comes first, because we understand how a nation is formed, and that every people, has a tie to their own nation. They have a sense of national pride. And if they're being run by colonial administrators, if their country is dominated by Western powers, they can't struggle for socialism. The Western powers won't let them. So they need to kick those Western powers out and look to build socialism. So I wanted to bring up Kayla Pop's Twitter because she interviewed a Venezuelan chavista, a Venezuelan organizer. Now I can't find it. I don't know how to search Kayla Pop's Twitter directly. But she interviewed a Venezuelan organizer about patriotism and how the U.S. should use patriotism. And the organizer said, gosh, now I can't find it. Dang it, I really wish I could find this. I've been able to find it on my phone before, but I should just have it always up so I can bring it up whenever I need it. But basically, the Venezuelan organizer said, yeah, your country's terrible, but what's left for your people to do except take up their own flag and overthrow the imperialist bourgeoisie who's pushing the whole world towards the brink of nuclear war? They say take up your own flag and sublate it, basically. And there's socialists now who talk about how we can't use Abraham Lincoln, right? We can't recapture Abraham Lincoln as a figure and use him to inspire people to struggle for socialism. And then those same people generally support the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela, the socialist revolution in Venezuela, these sort of ultras, or maybe not ultras, but people who I would say are a little bit confused. They say, we can't have any form of patriotism in the Western left. Our country is just all bad and evil. Its history is totally trash. Abraham Lincoln was a racist piece of crap who killed people. We can't recapture him and tell people his quotes about how labor is superior to capital. But then if you look at Simón Bolívar, like I'm writing a book on Venezuela right now and reading a biography on Bolívar. It's like 400 some pages long, pretty thorough. Like he massacred so many people. He massacred slaves. Like there were times when they had a bunch of prisoners of war after they won a battle and they didn't have enough money or resources to feed everyone. So they just killed them, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And Bolivar himself was from the wealthy landed class. The class dynamics in Spain, I can bring it up quick. Not in Spain, but in when Colombia was run by Spain. Sure. So you had, this is from the Smithsonian Museum. Continue the collection, please. This is the class struggle. Sorry, the class structure. I'll skip. Please just let me see it. God damn. This was the class structure of Spain. Sorry, I keep saying Spain. Of Spanish-dominated Latin America, Spanish-dominated Colombia and Venezuela, where Bolivar led this revolution. So you had the Peninsulares, which were Spaniards born in Spain. Those are the colonizers, the Spanish ruling over Colombia, Venezuela, all that land. Then you have the Creoles. This is what Bolivar was. Bolivar was one of these guys towards the top. People who were born in New Spain, which was Latin America at the time, of Spanish parents. So it's people, it was people who were born in Latin America, but from parents who were born in Spain. He was a Creole, right? He wasn't a mestizo. No, I'm pretty sure he had Spanish parents, but was born in Latin America. And they were of the bourgeois class. They owned wealth. You know, he was basically a capitalist. And like we said, in Europe, we said this earlier, in Europe, the capitalist class was emerging and overthrowing the feudal class, the aristocracy. Bolivar was part of the capitalist class rising up in Latin America and overthrowing the colonial administrators and moving towards capitalism. So he was towards the top of the class structure. It's not like he was a working person his whole life. He was borderline aristocratic. And then you have these other classes as well, who also fought alongside Bolivar, you know, and who Bolivar was able to organize and mobilize against the Peninsulares, which is to his credit, right? He did fight and gain independence for the people, which is why Venezuela today calls their revolution the Bolivarian Revolution. It's an extension of Bolivar's revolution. Bolivar and his troops gave us independence, but now we want to take that a step further and move towards socialism, economic independence from the West. So they used Bolivar, even though he was a flawed figure, right? Even though he made many mistakes and killed many people and was far from perfect. And then you have people saying we can't use Abraham Lincoln as a figure in the West, right? Because he was too morally gray. And it's like, well, Bolivar's morally gray too, and Venezuela has successfully used him to mobilize people to say we need to continue the revolution of Bolivar and learn from his mistakes and move forward. Why can't we do the same with Abraham Lincoln? And people literally say Abraham Lincoln only ended slavery because it helped him militarily, strategically, to have the slaves fight on his side. And it had nothing to do with his own morality. So therefore, who cares that he ended slavery? When Bolivar did the same thing, Bolivar did not pledge to end slavery until years after the war had already started, because he knew that if he announced that he would end slavery, he would get a lot of the slaves to fight on his side militarily. So to act like, you know, that makes him so morally evil that we can't recapture him as a historical figure, then you think the Venezuelans are also wrong for recapturing Bolivar as a historical figure. Yeah. That was a long rant, but Lincoln committed atrocities against indigenous people. He did. And Bolivar committed atrocities against people in his own country in Latin America. Anybody who sided with the Royalists, which was, you know, a lot of poor and working people, because the Royalists paid them off or convinced them to fight for them with propaganda, whatever else. That doesn't mean the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela is wrong for recapturing that figure and saying we need to, you know, move forward. This was a progressive revolution historically, regardless of the singular actions that Bolivar and Lincoln took. They moved the mode of production forward. Bolivar moved the mode of production in Latin America to capitalism, away from colonial imperialistic domination by the feudal class. So he basically moved them out of feudal colonialism into or towards capitalism. Abraham Lincoln ended slavery in the South. He moved the U.S. in the South from a slave mode of production forward to capitalism. So it's not a statement on their morality, right? It's a statement on how they moved the mode of production and society forward, away from the old and outdated societies of the past. And now it's the job of the socialists to move it forward again, move it out of capitalism into socialism. You're from Lincoln's not popular person in indigenous communities. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we call ourselves the Lincolnite revolutionaries. I'm not saying you go to places where Lincoln's not popular and try to organize people that way. I'm just saying people have a double standard for America, right? People, and I do think that we can recapture the good parts of Lincoln's history, especially locally in the Midwest. Right, everybody knows their locality and everybody knows their area, though, and this is a point I make all the time. There are so many different cultures in the U.S. Like, it's such a big country. The East Coast and the West Coast and the American South versus the Midwest. All these places have unique cultural values, and that means they're going to need unique organizing strategies in order to get people organized. Yeah. Is BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, a G7 division of progressive and reactionary bourgeoisie, or an inter-imperialist antagonism? Oh, BRICS versus G7. I see. Is it a division of progressive and reactionary bourgeoisie? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But I mean, BRICS is being led by the Chinese government and the Chinese party. It's not, I mean, the bourgeoisie, the progressive bourgeoisie in China, the national bourgeoisie, does support BRICS, and they do support, developing countries in the global south and developing their allies to try and give them a trading partner, to try and continue with this process of mutual development. But it's not being led by the bourgeoisie. It's being crafted by people who deeply understand Marxism. All right, the Belt and Road Initiative is being crafted by people who understand Marxism, understand the state of global capitalism, and the state of the U.S.-dominated financial oligarchy, or the U.S.-dominated financial system, where these organizations like the IMF and World Bank are basically able to do old-school siege tactics against countries by denying them financing and enforcing U.S.-backed sanctions. So what China's trying to do is develop these countries, help these countries become more self-sufficient, and allow them to produce more of their own, which does help the progressive bourgeoisie in China, the bourgeoisie that supports socialism, or says that they do for now. But it's also something that's not being crafted by them, right? It's not like them leading this up. If it was them leading it up, they would be trying to exploit countries more, right? If it was the bourgeois class themselves leading the Belt and Road Initiative, they would put interest on the loans. They wouldn't have like these interest-free loans. I don't think. I mean, that is kind of what the U.S. did with Europe with the Marshall Plan. But I would say it's more of a counter. It's more the Chinese working class and the Chinese communists countering the U.S. dominated financial system and U.S. dominated capitalist imperialism. It's them saying, we know that the U.S. is giving people or giving countries these structural adjustment loans, which leave them trapped in debt and force them to implement austerity, trickle down economics. So we're going to give countries another option. you can take out a loan with us that has much less interest, and will help you actually develop yourself. We'll actually have developmental loans rather than loans that just facilitate Western capitalists siphoning resources, like the loans that countries get from the IMF and World Bank. So I believe it's like it's a anti-imperialist policy and one of the most important policies in modern day, and a policy crafted by the dictatorship of the proletariat, and a policy which is like, it wouldn't have made sense years ago, right? It wouldn't have even been like a Marxist. I don't know. It's hard to say, but without China's level of economic development to this day, it wouldn't be possible. The BRICS initiative wouldn't be possible. And then I don't know if they would be doing it or is focusing as heavily on it as they are if it wasn't for the U.S. dominated financial system, if it wasn't for the IMF, World Bank, and all their little tentacle banks that help the U.S. enforce their global hegemony. The Bretton Woods system. Yes, DJ Base. Thank you. Sankara is an example of a near-perfect socialist revolutionary. And even he made mistakes that ended in tragic assassination. Rest in peace. Yeah, I mean, Sankara is a good example because people get mad. People get mad when Escher or someone will say, like, Stalin's only mistake was not being more hard on people. Stalin's only mistake was being too nice and letting too many people go. People get so mad when you say that, and they think it's a ridiculous thing to say. But there's an argument there to be made. There's an argument there to be made that Stalin allowed, too many revisionists and too many pro-capitalists and too many pro-Yahtzee people to run around. But there's really an argument to be made there with Sankara, that he should have been more quote unquote authoritarian, that he should have wielded the authority of the state and the dictatorship of the proletariat in his own favor, because he had people telling him up until the point where he was assassinated, like, yo, your second in command, Blaise Compaoré, is teaming up with the West. He's teaming up with the U.S. and Belgium or whoever else, and he's going to kill you. And Sankara was like, no, I'm not going to imprison my friend. I'm not going to imprison my second in command. I'm not going to be authoritarian, quote unquote. And eventually the guy killed him. And then that guy ruled the country as a pro-capitalist, pro-Western dictator until like 2021. So Sankara should have wielded authority and thrown that guy in jail as soon as he knew that guy was going to come after him. So that shows how, socialist countries, despite always being accused of being authoritarian and doing human rights abuses, sometimes they needed more authoritarianism. They were too lenient. And Thomas Sankara is a great example. It's like his only mistake. Like you said, he's as close as you can get to a perfect socialist revolutionary, him and Che Guevara. But, his mistake was being anti-authoritarian, which led to his death. Which shows how, distorted the Western narratives about these things are. Stalin's only mistake was not letting people from the USSR go to the US and see it up close, not just TV shows with the pools. They would beg to come back and never would have wanted anything but socialism. You're not wrong. Burkina Faso is now in shambles. They had 2 coups less than a year ago. I haven't followed it. I haven't followed the recent uprisings, but I know that Blaise Compaoré guy was thrown out of power by an uprising. There are a lot of people who like Sankara who would despite him if he took the necessary means to maintain socialism. I don't know if we've ever had a truer comment on this StreamYard, on this stream. This is so true. If Sankara would have thrown Blaise Compaoré in jail, there would be leftists in the U.S. calling him an authoritarian and talking about how evil he is and how, his tree planting campaigns and his feminism, those were cool. But he's an authoritarian dictator who threw someone in jail for trying to assassinate him. As if U.S. presidents wouldn't throw someone in jail if they found out there was an assassination plot. You'd probably be killed for treason. Right now, look, they're prosecuting Julian Assange for exposing U.S. war crimes to the public. Is that not authoritarian? Speaking of which, Consortium News published this recently. Great little article. Daniel Ellsberg said, indict me too. So Daniel Ellsberg is a whistleblower similar to Julian Assange, who in solidarity with Assange said, if you're going to prosecute Assange under the Espionage Act, which doesn't allow him to make a public defense trial and say that I leaked this information about U.S. war crimes in Iraq and other war crimes and other important information, such as Hillary rigging the DNC, or Hillary working together with the DNC to rig the primary against Bernie. He's not allowed to say I brought this information up and made it public in the interest of the public. Right? The Espionage Act doesn't allow him to make that defense, and that's why this is such a big deal that a journalist is being prosecuted under this act. Because Assange could be the first of many. They could then use the Espionage Act to prosecute any whistleblower. So Daniel Ellsberg has said, if you're gonna indict him, if you're gonna prosecute him, you have to indict me too. And Ellsberg was, of course, the whistleblower who famously leaked the Pentagon Papers, revealed a lot of stuff, including about Vietnam, I believe. But we'll read a little bit of this. It's from Joe Loria. Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg has told the U.S. Justice Department and President Joe Biden that he is indictable as WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange for having authorized possession of classified materials before they were published by WikiLeaks, and that he would plead not guilty because the Espionage Act is unconstitutional. Ellsberg revealed this week to the BBC interview program Hard Talk that Assange had given him the files leaked by U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to keep as a backup before they were published by WikiLeaks in 2010. Assange has been charged with violating the Espionage Act for possession and dissemination of classified info and faces 175 years in a U.S. prison if he is extradited from Belmarsh prison, which is like the most high security prison in the UK, in London. So Ellsberg is the second figure this month to come forward calling the U.S. government to indict him for the same reasons Assange has been charged. Cryptome published the decrypted, unredacted State Department cables on September 1st, 2011, prior to the publication of cables by WikiLeaks. John Young wrote in a Justice Department submission, from which Young posted on Twitter last week, no U.S. official has contacted me about publishing the unredacted cables since Cryptome published them. He wrote, I specifically request that the Department of Justice add me as a co-defendant in the prosecution of Mr. Assange in the Espionage Act. So literally calling for the U.S. State Department to bring him forward as a defendant, to prosecute him alongside Assange. The 1917 Espionage Act does not exempt journalists from receiving and publishing classified info, which Ellsberg says is a clear violation of the First Amendment and should be challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, the Espionage Act should not even exist, and the fact that Assange is being charged with it is horrific. But yeah, shout out to Daniel Ellsberg. I don't know exactly what the Pentagon Papers revealed, because that was obviously before I got super into politics, and it's just not something I've researched in depth specifically. But I thought, didn't Mike Gravel read the Pentagon Papers in front of Congress? Pretty sure he did. What did they reveal, though? Was it Vietnam? Was I right? I was right. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure Mike Gravel read them before Congress. Yep. 50 years ago, Senator Mike Gravel read the Pentagon Papers into the official record. More lawmakers should follow his lead. Yep. Solidarity and rest in peace to a real one. CGTN has a good doc on Sankara. Cool. Rev Left Radio has a good podcast on him, too. The illegal bombing of Cambodia and Laos. Oh, is that what it revealed? Gotcha. When Henry Kissinger literally said, if it moves, shoot, or whatever. Basically attempted to commit genocide against the Cambodian people. Not basically, he did. He did attempt genocide. And that's why Anthony Bourdain said, once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. because you'll know the suffering that he put on those people. Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. You will never again be able to open a newspaper and read about that treacherous, prevaricating, murderous scumbag sitting down for a nice chat with Charlie Rose or attending some black tie affair for a new glossy magazine without choking. Witness what Henry did to Cambodia, the fruits of his genius statesmanship, and you'll never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at the Hague next to Milosevic, who the Hague exonerated Milosevic. They said the U.S. accusations of genocide against Milosevic, which the U.S. used to justify carpet bombing Serbia, killing tons of people and destroying tons of industry and factories and power plants and farms. He was never prosecuted for it. He was never indicted. After Milosevic was already dead, they were like, oh, yep, the U.S. made up a lot of that evidence. There's no proof of genocide. Oh, well, sorry you got carpet bombed, Serbia. DYT, there's a growing pro-empire left. Do you think there's a growing pro-empire left like Vouch? Yes, there's... Oh, hey, Ewoks Unhinged. How's it going? Welcome to the stream. I'm glad you're here. But I do think it's growing. I think it's always been here, right? We say this a lot. Controlled opposition, State Department, CIA-funded opposition has always been one of their number one tactics. One of the number one tactics of the imperialist bourgeoisie, to destabilize and hurt leftist movements by backing people who claim to be leftists but are promoting imperialism, promoting the interests of the capitalist class. Vaush is just another iteration of that. He's the iteration of that in modern day. I don't know that he's directly funded by the CIA or State Department, but it doesn't matter. He serves the same function, right? He serves the same purpose, which is why his content is boosted by social media algorithms. But he represents sort of this woke imperialism, or this modern sort of woke fake left. So back in the day, you had folks like Hannah Arendt, who wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism, backed by the CIA and State Department, who basically said, I support socialism. I'm a socialist, but the USSR and China, they're evil. They're no worse than the Nazis, even though they beat the Nazis. They're just totalitarian. There's nothing we can learn from them. Everything they've ever done in that country is evil. Or in the countries that make up the Soviet Union. They're all evil, evil, bad. But I'm a socialist. I'm a leftist, That was in, I don't know when Hannah Arendt was, the 50s or 60s or something. But nowadays, it's that meme of the Republican bomber plane flying over a country and dropping bombs on them. And then the Democrat plane is doing the exact same thing, but it has a BLM flag and an LGBTQ flag on it. Right? We're still going to bomb you. We're still going to siphon your resources for capitalist expansion and accumulation. But we support BLM, right? We support a woman's right to choose. We support LGBTQ+, right? We support all these minority groups and all these communities. Let us bomb people and exploit people and accumulate capital and stop questioning us. We're on the left. It's this sort of woke imperialism that we've talked a lot about. That's Voosh. That's Vaush. That's the modern pro-imperialist left. And yeah, that is growing. That's becoming prominent. It's been growing for years now. That's the modern face of American imperialism. Like, there's no better example than the woke CIA commercials. The commercials like, join the CIA. We have lots of people of color and LGBTQ people and people with anxiety and all this shit. So it's co-opting left-wing social issues in the West and using them to promote imperialism, even to the point of saying, Afghanistan doesn't have women's rights. We need to send troops there, right? This country A doesn't have, or they discriminate against LGBTQ. We need to sanction them and attack them with our military. So even saying that we need to do imperialistic action for the sake of these social issues. So that is becoming more and more of a thing with time. Simon, hey, how's it going? Do you think the conflict in Ukraine is reaching a turning point with Russia's new wave of strikes and Kyiv's increasingly erratic actions? Yes. Yes, I was actually talking about that with my roommate earlier. I was like, Ukraine is becoming desperate. They're hearing the U.S. continually say, Ukraine's willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. And they're kind of like, no, we're not. I mean, a lot of people in Ukraine are. And Scott Ritter thought the missile that landed in Poland was probably fired by like a Ukrainian commander, somebody with the power to fire missiles, to try and get NATO involved in the conflict, because he realizes they're eventually going to lose. And, the U.S. is just pushing them at gunpoint, basically, to keep fighting Russia. And they keep saying, oh, they'll fight to the last Ukrainian. They're all willing to die for us in this proxy war. So Ukrainians on the ground are probably hearing that, and they're like, no, we're not. We need to act, we need to do something to get NATO involved. We need NATO to intervene and come help us, or we're screwed. So I thought that was a sign of a turning point too. If that's true, if Scott Ritter's assumption is true that it was fired by a Ukrainian commander, that they would be trying to get NATO involved now. I think it shows desperation. Their actions and Zelensky's actions have been erratic, like you said. Russia a while back started, striking Ukrainian energy production and actually attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, which they hadn't been doing. So yeah, it's a turning point. Russia's sick of fighting this war, and Ukraine is desperate. Yeah, man, I'd love to talk geopolitics with you sometime. It's definitely my area of discussion. Awesome. Yes, I'd love to be on your show as soon as possible. Eddie and Carlos are based and people see it. Thank you, Cobra Commander. And thank you to everyone who sent super chats and super stickers. I got to call it a day for this stream because I got to go help one of my athletes with their homework. But thank you all very much for hanging out. This was a super fun stream. Love doing the Wednesday streams. I hope to be back before next Wednesday. I'd love to be back tomorrow. But duty calls right now. I'd love to honestly keep going. But I got to go be at work by 2:30. So yeah, if I still got energy tonight, I'll do another stream tonight, maybe talking with Carlos. I love interacting with y'all and doing these one-on-one streams, but I really, really love streaming with Carlos and Noah for obvious reasons, because they rock. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who was here. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Peta Mio. Thank you, Ware Pilgrim. Thank you, Ewoks Unhinged. Cheers, fellas. Solidarity forever. Thank you, Jacob.